Hello YouTube. Today we're talking about one of the more complex and lesser explored topics in the Elder Scrolls lore, specifically Daedric Nymics, or a Daedra's true name. Nymics are essential to every aspect of a Daedra's life, and when I say every Daedra, I mean every Daedra, from the small critters populating the different realms of Oblivion to the almighty Daedric princes. So let's roll the intro and see what they're about. So, Daedric Nymics. As I mentioned in the intro, Daedric Nymics are essentially a Daedra's true name, but they are very much more than that. Most Daedra have multiple and they can change over the course of a Daedra's existence. And in the case of the Daedric princes, there's an extra layer of complexity. But let's begin at the basics. Every Daedra has a name. Sometimes it's just a species name, and perhaps they have a personal name as well when we're talking about intelligent Daedra. Think for example about this one. We call this type of Daedra Zivalai. They are intelligent humanoid Daedra, usually under the influence of a Daedric prince. Now, Zivalai, that's his species name, but he may also have a personal name. We don't know what it is because the game only shows us Zivalai when it's its health bar, but he may call himself Frank for all we know. So Zivalai Frank, a species name plus a personal name. But we could go further than that, because according to the lore, intelligent Daedra tend to live in clans and packs within their prince's domain. That clan can be a big part of a Daedra's identity, so some Daedra may have a clan name as well. So let's say that Frank belongs to the, let's say, Blade Bearer clan, which is an actual clan of intelligent Daedra in the Deadlands. So then we have Zivalai Frank of the Blade Bearer clan. A species name, a personal name and a clan name. But let's make it one slightly bit more complicated. With those clans you can also have a rank, like clan chief, which we can then also add to the name. So then we would have Zivalai Frank, chief of the Blade Bearer clan. Species name, personal name, clan name and rank. That's the structure of Nymics for most Daedra. A species name or proto-Nymic, a specific name comparable to a personal name called Neo-Nymic. Then you have the affiliation Nymic, describing which Daedric prince and potential clan that the Daedra belongs to. That's the Tribune Nymic. And then finally the Hero Nymic, which describes the potential rank that the Daedra has within the clan and within the larger structure of a Daedric prince's army. It's very important to note that these Nymics are not the names that we just used, so Zivalai Frank, chief of the Blade Bearer clan, that's not his Nymic, that's just his name that we give to him. His Nymic is a very strange set of words in the Daedric language, but more on that in a bit. Alright, now in order to summon a Daedra and have it do your bidding, your spell has to include all its Nymics. We don't get that in gameplay because obviously that would be a really big hassle to learn some Nymics and only then be able to summon one Daedra. Now, instead of just reading a spell tome. But without all the Nymics, a Daedra cannot be summoned and bound to your will, as the Nymic provides instructions of sorts as to which Daedra needs to be summoned, while at the same time the name is also needed to maintain control over the Daedra, as magic used in combination with all a Daedra's Nymics or true name gives you full control over the Daedra. This is also why Daedra will keep their Nymics secret and guard it as best as they can, even trying to hunt down mortals which they suspect know part of their Nymics or are in the process of discovering it, and thus why they use nicknames like the Dremora Lyranth, who we sometimes ally with in the Elder Scrolls Online. Her Nymic is not Lyranth, that's a nickname. If we knew her set of Nymics, she would most likely despise us and try to kill us if we knew her Nymics, as it would give us full control over her. Now, small, non-intelligent creatures which don't seem to have sentience, like small critters and Daedrats, they only have one proto-Nymic. According to some scholars and experts on Daedric summoning, this is because the small creatures don't have a sense of individuality, and thus their proto-Nymic or species name already encompasses everything about their essence. However, some others dispute this and argue that they may have a neo-Nymic or personal name-ish thing as well, but that is very short and negligible and therefore usually not needed. Either way, every Daedra which has a more encompassing sense of self or a bit of sentience does have a neo-Nymic or personal name, and depending on how powerful and complex the Daedra itself is, the longer and more complex the neo-Nymic is. For example, it's said that the neo-Nymic of a Titan Daedra is longer than the neo-Nymic of a Dremora, as they are more powerful and complex creatures. This also explains why it's harder to summon more powerful Daedras, as you need to know its entire Neonymic and need to know how to put it in a spell and have the energy to then bind it to your will using the Nymics. So that adds some complexity, especially when you have a Daedra bound to a Daedric prince or clan which has a defined rank, as that will add even more complexity to a spell with its Tribunimic and Hieronymics. So you might then say, okay Zork, that's all terribly interesting, but why do they have Nymics? Well, other than the purpose of giving mortals the ability to summon them and maintain control over them, Fear, one of the greatest wizards to ever live on Tamriel, actually describes Nymics as a sort of formula that the Daedra can use to regenerate. Let me explain. Mortals, when they die, their soul will generally go to one of the afterlife planes, such as Nords who die valiantly in battle, their souls generally go to Sovngarde. Well, Daedra, they don't have souls in the same way mortals do, and instead of having some cool magical afterlife, Daedra are regenerated by Oblivion's chaos back into existence when their physical form is killed or destroyed. They are regenerated according to their formula, their Nymics. Therefore, their Nymics are so much more than just a true name. They are a formula to their entire being as they are. Simply put, when a Daedra is killed, Oblivion's chaos will reform them according to their Nymic, meaning that they are recreated or regenerated in the exact way that they were before being killed. Simplified even further, the Nymic is the recipe with which Oblivion cooks the dish, or the Daedra. Now, some scholars say that this is why Daedra never change, and why they are unchanging creatures, because they are bound by their Nymics. For example, Fear speculates that because Mehrunes Dagon's Nymics describe chaos, he cannot be anything but a Daedric Prince of Chaos. But I'm getting ahead of myself a bit, as we will talk about the Daedric Princes in a minute, as they are far more complex. However, I do want to talk a bit about that statement of Nymics being the reason why most Daedra are changeless, because it doesn't seem to be true. We know that very powerful mages who know the methods can actually change a Daedra's Nymics, shaping them to their will, changing their species, personality, shape, powers, loyalty, etc. So, like that, you can essentially reprogram a Daedra to no longer belong to a Daedric prince and have them belong to you. This is different from simply controlling them with their true name. They would, in this case, literally be loyal to you in every way because they're reprogrammed to be in their Tribunimic, which is really interesting. It's likely that this is how the Daedric princes created the Daedric creatures inhabiting their realms, by inventing new Nymics or formulas according to which Daedra can be regenerated, or just generated if they don't exist yet. As a small example, in my video on Aarox the Mutilator, which I published a few weeks ago, I mentioned how Mehrunes Dagon created his own Daedric Ash Titans by copying Molag Bal's Titans. He did this likely by creating new creatures with similar but slightly altered protonymics, so slightly changing the species name to include new different properties, and also changing the Tribunimics to be loyal to him. It's likely that as masters of the Planes of Oblivion, Daedric princes have far greater knowledge and insight into this process than any mortal can ever have, and thus they are able to control and create their servants out of the chaos of Oblivion, rather than having to change existing creatures like how powerful Tamrielic mages do it. Although even among mages this is extremely rare. Most simply use the Nymics to summon Daedric creatures, while only exceptionally powerful mages like Fear that we talked about earlier are able to even attempt to reprogram Daedra using their Nymics. Although this does spark the question, we have seen some Daedra undergo some character development, like the Daedra Aarox the Mutilator and Lyrant in the Elder Scrolls Online. They changed a bit personality-wise, and the question is, does that mean that their Neonymic changes with them? We don't really know, but we do know that the Neonymic also includes personality things. But that's interesting to think about, especially realizing that that could mean a Nymic can ever be in flux and not knowable for a long period of time, as after a while a Daedra's personality may have changed. But yeah, that's just speculation, since we don't really know a lot about how that works. However, as promised, let's talk about the Daedric princes now. Well, we don't really know exactly how, but we do know that they have an additional Nymic called an Ego Nymic, which we don't know exactly what it describes. Some scholars seem to speculate that Ego Nymics are an additional layer of protection to protect a prince from being summoned by mortals, a bit like a VPN in our world, which I would probably plug if I would sell out, which I haven't yet, so there's no advertisement here. But jokes aside, these Ego Nymics are part of a Daedric prince's very being somehow, and also has to do with the control over their plane of existence. So, for example, with Mehrunes Dagon, it describes something of his control over the Deadlands. and the Daedric princes seem to have actual control in some way over these Ego Nymics, as they are able to split them up and have them be changed. For example, Mehrunes Dagon once split parts of his Ego Nymic and imbued them into embryos in mortal wombs. Then when these children were born, they had great destructive power and control over Daedric magic, so they had part of Mehrunes Dagon's power. But the idea here was that by having mortal children grow up with a part of Dagon's Ego Nymic, they would fuse these parts to the mortal plane. Then when these children are raised into adulthood, Mehrunes Dagon's cultists would sacrifice them to Mehrunes Dagon, so he could reclaim these parts of his Ego Nymic, which were now influenced by the mortal plane, which in turn may give him some form of control over the mortal plane and allow him to enter and influence the mortal plane in some ways. This plan ended up failing due to the player's involvement, but it does show how the Ego Nymic is more than just a prince's being and actually likely influences some of their abilities to exercise control over their own realms and possibly other realms. Some people also speculate that despite the name Nymic, these Ego Nymics may not actually be part of the name, since they are in some way transferable, so they may be something else entirely and not part of the Nymics. But that also doesn't seem to be true, since it seems that the Ego Nymic is also used partially to regenerate the Daedric prince when defeated, as due to the Ego Nymic being used with regeneration, it seems that the prince retains control over their realm. But yeah, we don't know a lot about how that works. Most of the knowledge that we do have is from the writings and dialogues of some summoning masters on Tamriel, but even then, they aren't able to learn everything about the topic, since the Daedra guard such knowledge with great efforts, as when mortals know too much about it, they risk becoming trapped or bound or even changed, so that's why especially Daedric princes aren't particularly likely to share such knowledge, because mages like the Vaith Fear have basically described that even though a Daedra is very powerful, just knowing a few simple spells and his entire set of Nymics would allow a weak child to control a very powerful Daedra. So assuming that's why probably the Ego Nymics will remain a bit of a mystery, since if we knew them, we might be able to control a Daedric prince. Still, interesting stuff. And likely far more complex than explained here, but these are some of the basics, and I really hope that you enjoyed this lore video. And if you did and you learned something new about the Elder Scrolls lore today, then consider subscribing to the channel and returning for the next lore video probably next week. Now, all that remains for me to be done is to thank my top Patreon supporters: Mr. Bernardo Binna, Gabriel Binna, Polar Rasputin, Athena Hiodes, Dragonborn of Nerevar, Volkure of Argonia, King Chris, Bulge, Scrap of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Soda Bushido, Rakai, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video next week. Bye bye.